All right. Teamwork.
All right. So now he can share all of this with the FBI and. Okay. So yes, first a huge thank you. It was because of this experience that I had here at UNC Greensboro that I even had the insight to do this dissertation. The original dissertation topic that I had was related to hate speech and hate organizations in libraries, which is very pertinent in this day and age, that it was not feasible, and also my faculty at the University of South Carolina thought you might not want to be dealing with South Carolina hate groups right now. It's not the best time to make friends with those guys. So I shifted my focus, and here we are. Second, just some advice here. I actually had 2 copy editors read my dissertation, and this still slid through. This is my 7th grade English teacher, Miss Hurley here, and she is pointing at that misspelling of dissatisfaction in my title and giving me an F for it. So even though I had 2 copy editors look at my dissertation, that still slid through. But fortunately, I talked to some other people who finished dissertations, and they told me that they also had misspellings here and there. And then just as an exercise to see how badly I had performed, I went on ahead and did an EBSCO search, and I found that dissatisfaction is actually misspelled a lot. So, you know, it's not as bad as I feel it is at times, but it's still a little embarrassing. So for those of you who will be writing theses and dissertations, have your copy editor look at the title as well. Okay? Right. Okay. So just some brief background. I don't think my animations are actually working. That last thing was animated, and these were supposed to come in. They're all in at once, but that's okay. We're going to get through this. So the U.S. population is about 66% non-Hispanic white, and the U.S. librarian demographics are about 88% non-Hispanic white. We want to see those numbers kind of mirror each other a little better, because the reason why we believe that diversity counts is because it seems that people of color appear to be more comfortable using library facilities when the collections reflect them or are relevant to them, and then also when they see other people of color working in these facilities. So it doesn't feel like it's a white space, it feels like it's a space for everyone. There are a lot of diversity initiatives being practiced right now. I'm actually an alum of North Carolina Central University. My former dean, Irene Owens, who gave me a scholarship to attend. She is here with us today, and I'm very happy to see her. And one of the diversity recruitment initiatives that we have are diversity scholarships. We also have things like diversity residencies and that sort of thing. And then just have a little definition here. A diversity residency is the post-degree work experience designed as an entry-level program for recent graduates of an MLS program. It's specifically tailored to diverse hires. Usually, diverse hires means people of ethnic minority background, but there can be other factors such as sexual orientation or disabilities and things of that nature. And this is going to be a little weird since all my bullets are popping up at the same time. It's kind of throwing me off, but just bear with me. Research problem. We believe that positive experiences, which this is common sense. You're going to notice that a lot of what I say is probably going to seem like common sense, and yet a lot of it is not being done. So positive experiences may aid retention in keeping ethnic minorities in this field, but the anecdotal evidence that you will hear is that not all residency experiences are positive or overall satisfying. So we needed to investigate what created an ideal situation of highly motivated diversity residents who had quote-unquote high hygiene, and that just basically means they have fewer complaints. I'll get to that when I get to that slide, but basically if somebody has bad hygiene, you're going to have complaints about them. So what we are looking for are situations with quote-unquote good hygiene and few complaints. There is very little existing empirical research that explores these factors. And in fact, there was nothing that collected data and then analyzed the data using inferential statistics. My dissertation is the first to do that. Okay, as I said, the residency literature currently is almost exclusively anecdotal. It largely frames residencies in positive lights with a few scattered difficulties. But I was able to attend a conference in 2009, and at that conference, it was just like a come-to-Jesus moment. Everyone was complaining about their residency experience, and I was sitting there. I was, at the time, in the middle of a great residency experience, so I was kind of like, oh, this is new to me, but this needs to be discussed because it's not in the literature. And I will also say something that I co-wrote with a diversity resident actually got watered down really heavily because her employer said, no, you can't just write about you have problems in your current job. So she kind of got censored. And that was another part of the reason why I was thinking, okay, this needs to become a research endeavor because I'm at the point now where I can write about this freely and research it freely, and I'm seeing that there are people who are not able to. In current residency strategies had not been put to empirical testing, and that needed to change. So hopefully my piece is the first of many that looks at that. So the design and method of my study, it was sequential, explanatory. It's quantitatively focused with the qualitative portion kind of reinforcing or I guess supplementing the quantitative findings. The quantitative population, they were all past and present diversity residents. Even though I had 102 people complete valid surveys, usually the questions only, because people were skipping questions that they felt didn't apply to them, usually the questions analyzed the responses of between 87 and 89 participants. All right, and then for the qualitative portion, I used the thematic narrative analysis, and I conducted semi-structured interviews with 11 interviewees who had been residents between the years of 2000 and 2016. Okay, so my theoretical framework was the motivation hygiene theory of Frederick Herzberg. He developed this around 1934. This is my reminder to spell dissatisfaction correctly, by the way. So you'll see that throughout the presentation. And what Herzberg did was he identified what he called motivating factors, and those were the factors in a job that caused people to be highly motivated. And then he identified hygiene factors, and these were the things that caused people to be dissatisfied and have complaints. And so your goal is to create a work environment where your workers are highly motivated and also have few complaints. So again, there's a kind of a common sense angle to that. I don't think anyone seeks to have unmotivated employees, but at the same time, this is kind of what needs to be said to people sometimes. So we had 11 total research questions. 7 of the research questions tested these Herzberg concepts. In the Herzberg research questions, they explored the correlation of the factors to how people scored their residency experience overall. There were then also 4 additional research questions that explore outlook. And just to note, the qualitative portion didn't directly test the research questions. So I'm going to go through findings really quick. Okay. Null hypotheses were rejected in 4 of those 7 Herzberg-related research questions, and so I applied the Herzberg implications and framing to those 4 research questions. I do need to point out, though, that just because a null hypothesis wasn't rejected, that doesn't mean that the factor was invalid. It just meant that I could not find a correlation that was worth bringing up through my own research. Okay, so research question 1, identify correlation between efforts to garner support for the residency by coordinators and admin and the overall view of the residency. So this concerned a hygiene factor of relationships, and the broad implication for diversity residency practice is you can eliminate job dissatisfaction for diversity residents by creating an environment where residents feel that the coordinators supported staff and faculty buy-in. So basically what was going on was there were some very strange things going on I saw in the interviews where people just started residencies and they didn't try to get the faculty and staff on board. So people basically just saw an affirmative action hire, and that created a lot of envy and disdain. Coordinators should explain why the residency exists. Coordinators should explain the residents' duties and what will be expected of them. Coordinators should ensure that the residents that they'll defend their professionalism, and coordinators should ensure residents that they'll defend their work record. Skipping to the fifth research question, it identified a correlation between assessment and overall view of the residency. This was a motivation factor of the work itself, and the broad implication of practice basically is assess the residency program, and that's not always happening. Residencies are between 1 and 3 years. Usually they're temporary appointments. So you have a cycle going on, and during this cycle, it is wise to do assessment practices so that with each cycle things improve, and we found that not everyone does that. Again, it's probably something that comes off as common sense, but just because it's common sense, that does not mean it makes it into practice. So, review and implement best practices, identify and address residency shortcomings, improve the residency as needed, and get feedback from the residents. Some people reported that they didn't even have exit interviews after their residency term was over. Research question 6 identified a correlation between job duties and overall view of the residency. This is another motivation factor. It's the same factor actually of work itself. The broad implication for practice is to assign job duties that are professional and respectable and trust the resident with professional tasks. So, assign duties that exceed graduate student and intern expectations. So you have a full-time employee here. I also don't want that to get lost. A diversity resident is somebody who is temporary full-time. So they should be doing things that exceed what your interns are doing. Prevent excessive directionless and idle time. That became a recurring theme. People said they had a lot of idle time during their residencies. Also, avoid assigning busy work to the resident or what can be perceived as busy work. In research question 7, identified a correlation between preparedness for the next appointment and the overall view of the residency. This concerned a motivation factor of growth. The broad implication for practice was to create an environment where residents feel their employability and marketability have increased. So the suggestions there based on the questions that were asked to my survey participants. Have residency work mirror vacancy announcement duties. Position residents to make lasting professional connections. This was something that I can tell you UNCG with, at least in my experience, did particularly well. I was connected to people throughout the state, and actually right after my residency here, I went to work for Forsyth Public, and it was because Gerald and some others introduced me to the director over in Forsyth County. Teach residents do's and don'ts. Have the residents learn what librarians do. We've got a question there. I don't know. And have residents leave feeling prepared. Is there someone who can answer that chat question that came up? I don't really know how to deal with that.
Just asking about password.
No one's trying to. No one's on.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just carry on, and I'll help address that.
Okay, cool. All right, so some things that I failed to reject, hostilities from coworkers. I could not actually, through my data, conclude that the fewer or the less hostile coworkers were to the resident, the better the resident's experience was. I thought that was something that I'd be able to have as a correlation within the data, but that turned out not to be the case. That was inconclusive. The microaggressions piece is my own fault. That's why there's a little star behind that. Basically, the questions that I asked were not worded as they should have been, and therefore the data that was collected on that front just did not make any sense. But hopefully that's something that someone else will be able to pick up and do a study on whether or not these diversity residents are encountering microaggressions and how that is affecting their work experience. And then finally, perceived staff buy-in. So this is a little bit different from that first research question that I was able to draw a correlation where the data did support that if they perceived that the coordinators supported staff and faculty buy-in, that correlated with good experiences. But that didn't necessarily mean that if they felt that the staff bought in, that would improve or not improve their residency experience. Just a couple of interesting numbers here, and this was very important to me because sometimes, especially in the Twitterverse, these residencies just take a lot of blame, and people say things about them that are not necessarily backed by empirical evidence. So I did want to point out that of 88, I had 88 respondents basically score their residency experience on a scale of 1 to 10. Only 7 of those 88 gave their experience less than the 5, which was the okay or average response. So the overwhelming majority of my respondents at least were rating their experiences as good or at least okay or average. Another piece of noteworthy data I felt is that 44% of respondents were unsure of if their coworkers supported the residency perks, and that's the thing. Most residents are, since they're temporary and since we're trying to prepare them to work in other places, they have a few additional perks that could be increased travel, among other things. And there was some hesitation among my respondents as far as saying that their coworkers supported them receiving those extra perks. And some of the qualitative data also suggested that, yeah, that drew some envy from coworkers and caused some hostility. Okay, qualitative results overview. I had 6 emergent themes that developed through the interview process, and the Herzberg framing and implications were applied to those emergent themes. I had 11 interviewees, and 3 of them had overall bad experiences. The remaining had either good or mixed experiences. And so I'll go through these themes rather quickly and then share a few quotes that came through as well. I will hope that some of you may, even though it's long, it's 250 pages, but I'll hope that some people decide to take a look at the dissertation, as I do feel there were some interesting quotes there, but I couldn't get all of that on the slides today. So emergent theme 1, knowledge of who the residents are, what the residency is, and why the residency was established combats institutional hostilities and confusion, which will reduce resident dissatisfaction. This also correlates with one of the quantitative correlations that I discovered. Coworkers are not always told vital information about the resident, what they're doing, why they're there, and that sort of thing. And so again, when you have this mysterious person who was hired, and a lot of times race or some other factor was part of the reason they were hired, if you don't know what's going on with that, of course, that can cause some envy or some hostility. Faculty and staff also may have different information, and I ran into this with a few people. Good to see you. Oh, you're fine. So basically what happened here was that we had a few directors who were garnering support for the residency program only with the faculty, and of course residents also work closely with staff. And so the issue came up where you had staff who were very loyal to their institution for years or sometimes decades, and then they see somebody come right out of library school and get all this stuff. And they, again, that creates envy, it creates hostility. People need to know why this position is there. And resident perks may need explanation. If somebody is getting a higher travel budget than you, for instance, you may want to let people know why that's the case. It's a long quote, but I'm going to read it. The staff thought, this was one of my interviewees, the staff thought, here goes this new grad. Some of them didn't even realize that I graduated from library school. The librarians did, but I was already working there for like a year in, and someone was like, you're not in library school? And I'm like, no, I'm not, I graduated. And I think there was definitely like an air of animosity between the idea that these librarians can come in, and it's like, I've been working at the library for like 10 years, and I should be able to do what they are doing, but I don't have the degree. So that is another concerning thing. Not every institution even lets the coworkers, faculty, and staff know that these people actually are graduates of an MLIS program. That needs to change. Okay. Emergent Theme 2, diversity residents can avoid dissatisfaction with appropriate guidance and support from coordinators, supervisors, and administrators. Coordinators should have the best interests of the resident in mind. Be aware that residents may lack perspective. These are people who are new professionals, so they don't know a lot of the things that you do, so you can't just leave them without direction. And then there's a line to walk between being too structured and too loose, and that was something that I had a difficult time with the qualitative portion of this. Was some people said they were too structured, some people said they were too loose as far as expectations and guidance, but at the same time, some people just need more guidance than other people. So that's a very thin line to have to walk. A quote here. Sometimes it's what she feels is best and not what I feel is best for me, but no, absolutely, there's a lot of effort on her part. She's speaking of her residency coordinator, who she said had a lot of misguided effort in trying to steer her in a professional direction. Emergent Theme 3, opportunities to perform meaningful, challenging, and innovative work can generate satisfaction in diversity residents. Duties do need to be professional, so again, that goes back to that piece of have what your residents are doing exceed the expectations of an intern. Curb idle time. The reason I have question mark next to capstone is because there were arguments for and against having a capstone project within the residency. The biggest argument against was that a capstone expectation may obligate the resident to stay after the resident, or like the resident may find employment, permanent employment, and want to leave early, but they may not have completed their capstone. Okay, goal setting made experiences better. Not every institution set goals with the resident. That's problematic. Ambition and innovation. Just because somebody is a new hire does not mean that they cannot be innovative and contribute things, because this is supposed to be a win-win. A diversity residency should not just benefit the resident, it should also benefit the library. And a lot of diversity residents are coming from other fields like tech fields and things like that, and they have ideas that can contribute to the library. Matching interests made experiences better. A lot of residency programs apparently have a vision in mind. A lot of residency programs appear to steer people towards public services, but not everybody who serves in a residency program wants to be in public services. So try to match those experiences. Another quote, even though it started off a little slow with a lot of idle time, as I started to pick up my workload with instruction and research and then getting into the technology aspects, I very much feel confident that anywhere, whether it was a community college or a research institution, a liberal arts institution, that I would have had a great opportunity to get hired. And even now, with the experience that I gained after the residency, I feel confident that I can work everywhere. So this is a testimony from somebody who had a good residency experience. Emergent Theme 4, job dissatisfaction occurs with lack of assessment, unpreparedness, and failure to communicate residency intent to the residents. Visible assessment is seen as whenever there were visible whenever there were visible attempts to assess the residency and implement best practices, those were the times when people had the best experiences. Unprepared and visionless residency has caused a lot of dissatisfaction. Probably no need to guess as to why that is. And then transparency of intent may reduce dissatisfaction, and that was an interesting piece. So here's a quote. As far as assessment, I never filled out any formal assessment. I never filled out any forms. I never did any surveys. I think that they based a lot of assessments, I guess, on one-on-ones, and then whatever they felt like they observed, there was no exit interview. Try to avoid that, have some exit interviews. Try to make it obvious that you are trying to assess and improve the program as your current resident goes along and then for the next cycle. And also, I ran into this with several of the interview subjects. They got kind of a bait and switch, which reminds me of Pennywise the Clown there. So this was a little piece of an excerpt of a back and forth. One of my subjects said, on my second day, they told us that we were hired to be change agents. And I was like, well, did that come up during the interview? And the interviewee said no. And I said, okay, so that was sprung on you after you were hired. And the response was, yeah. So keep in mind that this is a new professional, so hiring them to be a change agent, that might be a lot to put on somebody. So don't bait and switch. Be transparent in what you're going to be expecting of people when you hire them. Emergent Theme 5, satisfaction emerges when a resident achieves growth and advancement during the term that appears to improve future job outlook. Residents should come out of term feeling they will advance forward with no back steps. The three worst experiences these people either had stagnated gains or actually felt that they took a step back career-wise after the residency, and that's not what we want to see. Residencies, they require a lot of effort, so you want that effort to be rewarded with somebody being somewhere that they wouldn't have been otherwise, as opposed to they complete the residency and then they get a job that they could have gotten not even with a library science degree. Okay, a quote again, the residency made the difference. This was a positive quote. It made all the difference. I love my residency. I know that it was the standout piece for me, not just on my resume, but being able to talk about my experience and how much I was able to gain from that experience. No one who got hired or who interviewed for the position that I was eventually able to get and move to, redact the institution name, had coordinated such a large program. And then finally, Emergent Theme 6. Effective mentorship practices can remove job dissatisfaction during the residency appointment. Mentoring should not be left to direct supervisors. This appeared to be a theme, at least in the qualitative portion. There needs to be somebody who, if the resident is actually having a problem with the direct supervisor, that somebody can intervene. Mentors should understand the resident's career goals. Mentors should understand the career needs of a new professional. And then there's a bit of a question mark. Several other residents had external mentors who were not affiliated with the hosting institution. And from my research, I was not able to even make a guess as to whether or not having an internal or external mentor was better. I do think there's room to have both, so there could be benefits to having two mentors possibly. As far as going back to that quantitative piece, those 4 non-Herzberg questions that I asked, there was a strong correlation between overall view of the residency and the outlook on the future of library and information science. So basically what I'm saying there is that the higher these residents scored their residency experience, the more positively they view the outlook of library and information science. There was a clear correlation between overall view and enthusiasm for the profession. So if somebody scored their residency experience highly, then they also scored their enthusiasm for the profession highly. There was no noteworthy correlation found between overall view and what I just termed ambitiousness of goals. And for instance, what I'm speaking to there is just because somebody rated their residency experience highly, that did not mean that they felt more or less ambitious. And then finally, there was no noteworthy correlation between overall view and activity with professional organizations. So now that we've gotten through that, limitations, the population was not large enough for me to make some critical comparisons. I don't know, there was no way for me to know how many people have actually served as diversity residents. But being that I only had between 87 and 89 responses to most questions, I could not break down, for instance, those who worked in cohorts compared to those who worked as lone residents and see if one type of experience was better than the other. Another limitation is that some people who served a long time ago had forgotten some experiences and admitted that, and therefore forgotten experiences can contribute to missing data and sort of a data gap. This does not account for improvements over time. The study, so I couldn't determine whether or not someone who served a long time ago was having a worse experience than someone who served more recently due to the field improving, hopefully, those residency experiences. This is my fault. It lacked an open comment section. I scrapped the open comment section and about like 50 survey questions because my committee told me you're doing too much, and that turned out to be a mistake. So I should have had that open comment section on my survey instrument. But some people did email me, and that's how I got some of this information that I got. The microaggression portion, again, was insufficiently handled. Again, that was my fault, and that was due to wording of questions. I do not know who actually filled out surveys, so a lot of people who had bad residency experiences apparently have left the field, and I still tried to reach out to those people, but they were harder to reach out to than people who were still in the field. I do not know if they filled out surveys or not, and if they had, the results may have been different. And then I am looking at correlation as opposed to causation, so I can't say, for instance, that I can only say that these things correlate. I can't say that this factor causes that factor. Suggestions for further research, biases, goals, attitudes of coordinators and coworkers. I'm going to look at that. And then also a career trajectory study. I think if we're putting all of this effort into residencies, then there should be some notable career trajectory difference between those who do and don't serve in those capacities. So some post-study feedback. Those of you who follow the hashtag CritLib on Twitter, this dissertation, once I put it online, people actually read it, which was surprising to me because I'm not going to read it again. It's 250 pages long. So, but I had some CritLibbers who were quite shocked, but pleasantly shocked, it seemed, that some of the data that I collected. So I've got the little Will Smith shock face there. And then I entered a dissertation contest, and they did not like my dissertation so much. I got everyone rated at A, below average, but that's okay. That is okay. I think that some of that just resulted from them not understanding the purpose of the dissertation. And then there was some weird feedback from one of those people that was just really strange, and so it is what it is. However, having said that, why I did it, it's personal, but it ain't. I do care about these diversity residency programs, but at the same time, one person who emailed me back to provide me some feedback about my survey instrument said, man, with these questions that you're asking, you must have had a horrible time. And I had to reassure this person that, no, I had a great experience, but I reviewed the literature, I've attended conferences, I see that my experiences are not the same experiences that everyone has. So it was personal for me to just collect this data and see the state of diversity residency programs, but this is not a personal, passive-aggressive way of me saying, man, UNCG really botched this thing. That's not what went on. I think that there was a lot of CritLib chatter at one point about opposing residency programs, and people were saying that residents feel that they're being tokenized and all this stuff, and, you know, but then they couldn't come up with the, you know, anything backing this up. They were just saying this, and so I was like, let me put some numbers behind it. And then finally, I do want to say that most diversity residency experiences, at least according to the data I collected, these experiences are good, and these experiences do help people. So I do not want people to look at what's going on Twitter and say these need to be put an end to. I think that these are a positive thing that our field is doing. And I want to say to the people of UNC Greensboro that you all did a great job with me, and I think to the people who succeeded me as well, so applaud yourselves. And that is the end of that presentation. Any questions? And I also want, oh, go ahead.
So you said some people, the experience had been so long ago that they couldn't remember. What was the range of
So,
the respondents can have their residency.
yeah, so some people actually emailed me and their experiences, their residencies had been in the 80s or early 90s, so that's been a while now. And yeah, and that was the thing. One lady just when she emailed me back, she admitted she was just like, I served in the early 90s. I tried to do your survey as well as I could, but you know, even if bad things happened, time had a way of healing, and that's what she told me. So I did have a question on the survey instrument that asked roughly how long put into ranges of years ago that you completed the term. But again, because I had so few responses, I could not, you know, separate that data and say, yeah, people who served 20 years ago had worse experiences than people who served 2 years ago.
So it sounds like it's a wide range.
It was a very wide range. And that was one of the things when I was talking about that dissertation contest I entered. One of the people who was dinging me, his feedback was, your range is too long. And I had to feel confident in saying, hey, there's so few diversity residents anyway that and this is explained in the dissertation, so I wish he had paid attention. But, you know, because I had to have that range, because if I'd have set a range of like 10 years, I might have only gotten 30 responses, you know. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
The mentoring part of it,
Yes.
were those mentors set up by the library, or they?
Not all the time. So there were times when mentorship was set up by the library. There was time when people sought their own mentors or got mentors through professional organizations. And then there was several people told me that they had to have mentors due to, is it the Minnesota Institute? Do y'all know what I'm talking about? Yeah, and they were required to have mentors due to participating in that, and they were, I think, required to have external mentors actually. So there was a wide range of stuff going on there as well. But it wasn't always, it certainly wasn't always the case that the library was setting up mentors.
So the external mentors would be informal, or they were strict?
That I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I didn't probe that deeply. If someone said they had an external mentor, I kind of went with it, to be honest with you. So, yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering if it has an example of what would have been misguided. You had that one quote about this person feeling like they were guided in the wrong direction or something like that. Why do you think that mismatch happened? I know you're speculating here, but
I got some feedback. That was a long discussion. That was several of those interviews were like 3.5 hours to 4 hours long. That was quite a transcription endeavor, as you can imagine. But part of that was with that specific person, there was just an issue of do public service, do public service, do public service. Even if you don't want to do public service, do public service. Okay, well, this is kind of a waste of time. I know that I want to do technical services and don't even want to staff the public desk if possible, and yet there was a very strong focus. It seemed like that director was kind of confident that if this person did public services, they'd want to do it. Like all of a sudden you'd have this extreme introvert who never talks to people, who would very much just feel the love of the reference desk and become the greatest public services librarian ever, and that did not happen.
do you think that happened because the library was unclear that they wanted somebody with public service oriented?
That's possible. Again, I don't. There was an issue with this transparency issue, so I think that there may be libraries who just have in mind, yes, we want someone who is geared towards public services, but then that isn't really explained or communicated in the hiring process. So I do think it's good for the associate institutions to be as upfront as possible.
Natalie and I spoke at ALA once on a panel. Natalie was our third resident. And we were up there with Penn State and Tennessee, larger institutions. And the theme for that was institutional commitment. There was a correlation there in terms of how important that is. Did you find evidence that organizational commitment was played out in any particular way, like training trainers or meetings with staff to educate them on what we needed to do and stuff like that?
I hate to say this, but I'm actually not entirely sure I understand the question.
Well, organizational commitment in the sense of if you're going to be a host institution, are you doing what it takes to be a good host?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Well, that was a lot more basic than it was coming off. There were a few examples, and again, I can't name institutions, as you can understand, but there were some. It seemed like there were a few specific institutions that implemented this, either for the sake of numbers or because somebody outside of the library said you need to do something, and so this was what was undertaken. And then there were quite a few institutions. I actually will name an institution in this case because it's a good thing, so I don't think they'll mind. But the University of Tennessee, I'm going to go ahead and put them out there. They apparently assess it every single cycle. Their commitment is strong. They get everybody on board, faculty and staff and everyone in between. And it looks like they might be a shining example of institutional commitment, and I think it shows with some data. Not necessarily that any of their residents spoke to me. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But at the same time, yeah, it looked like you had an example there of someone who was doing things right. Yes.
Go ahead.
So have you gathered data from the admin?
Not yet. That is on my suggestions for further research piece. This was heavily focused on the residents, and I should note this. One of my interviewees, I only had one interviewee who did this, but she did this without prompting. She went into a pretty long tangent about what is the responsibility of residents and how can we be the players that we need to be so that the host institution is benefiting and that sort of thing. So the other side needs to be looked at. I concentrated with this scope on the side of the residents, but I would like to do studies with host institutions because they may have needs. Well, they obviously have needs as well and things that they want to get out of the experience, and I think that they deserve that.
I just wanted to ask, I'm curious, did you know, there are some institutions that have the cohort where it might be 2 or 3 going through at the same time. Mm-hmm. Did you hear anything about their experience?
And that was the problem. So what happened was, again, I did not have enough respondents. So I did have a question on the survey instrument: did you serve alone or in a cohort? And there were so few responses that I couldn't make any real statistically valid assessment that, yeah, people who served in cohorts had better experiences than those who served solo. Now, conventional wisdom is that being in cohorts helps, but also one of my interviewees did say that when I brought up that cohort versus non-cohort issue, I brought that up in the qualitative piece as well to see if I could find some distinction, and I couldn't. But one of my interviewees basically just said that there was a member of her cohort who was just awful, and that it reflected poorly on the entire cohort, very, very poorly on the entire cohort. So yes, I can't make any determination as to whether cohort experiences are better or worse than solo experiences. Yes.
So you said you didn't have, you couldn't follow up with some people because they left the profession. Did you get any respondents who had left the profession?
To be honest, I don't know. I think so, but and now that you mentioned that, it probably would have been good to put on the survey instrument, are you still in LIS, and I did not. But I mean, I can say that I found these people on social media or in their jobs outside of the field or whatever. So, and I was able to get names from host institutions. The host institutions were actually they were pretty cooperative with what I was doing. I think they understood and trusted that I wasn't going to dime them out if they didn't have a good program or didn't seem to have a good program. But even when I reached out to these folks, I did not, I don't know if they filled out the surveys or not. Yes, Steve.
Personally, congratulations. I think the work is exceptional.
love the confidence that you have in the research. And of course, you know, they're not going to research participation is going to ever improve for the person whether you invest it or not. But what I was wondering is that, is there a way of knowing or finding out how choosing a resident program may affect positively or negatively one's career choice? And being a year at Greenville, I think is a very wonderful environment, especially with fellow leadership. But you have that in the three who graduated from that program, I think the two have finished PhD program. And I suspect that they're Orlando and will be interested. So, in essence, does choosing a resident program and the experiences that one gains from that resident program help to shape one's career?
And that's why I want to do that career trajectory study that I had mentioned. I think it's if there's no, my opinion and this opinion, I've had other former residents disagree with me strongly on this, but my opinion is that if the trajectory doesn't seem to be affected, then it doesn't make sense to ask the host institutions to put all this work into coordinating and facilitating the programs. I really do think that it shouldn't just be a matter of retention of numbers, which that's just a fundamental disagreement I've had with some other residents I've spoken to. I think that those who serve in residencies and benefit from that experience should do more than just stay with the entry-level position throughout their career. And I was told I'm being judgmental, but I just feel I want these efforts to be rewarded, if that makes sense. So that career trajectory piece is one thing that I do want to look at and see, is there any sort of notable difference between what former residents have done, not just in the positions they hold, I guess, but also what they've contributed to the field as opposed to those who have not served.
And also, I think that for impact, really think of how and the diversity, the thinking institutions, and how we want to use diversity.
That's the problem, and I should have mentioned that. So in my literature review, I do note that it seems that the field, even with all these initiatives in place, the 1990 numbers and the I think 2012 were the most recent numbers I had access to. There's not a marked difference in how diverse the field is, and we're talking about what is that, 22 years or so. So I can't say that these programs are really affecting because I think there are more residencies now than there were in 1990, and so it does not appear that they're having that marked outcome. And I don't know that even though of course I personally love the scholarships because that saved me some student loan debt, but I also can't say that the scholarships are leading to retention based on the numbers that have been put out through diversity counts. So yeah, that's an important angle to it.
My question kind of, you answered it a little bit in a few, but I'm curious about how you identify your sample. Was it solely in contacting institutions that have residencies, or did you put out calls on listservs, or how are you reaching people?
Yes, so actually I can talk about that a bit. So I had done a residency study, more of an informal residency study for a book chapter that I was doing about 1.5 years or 2 years ago. And really I relied mostly on listservs and that sort of thing in order to get participants for that study. And I was only able to get 22 people to participate with that. So I realized at that time, I was like, this is going to be an endeavor. I'm going to have to go to ACRL used to, I see they've updated their page now, but ACRL used to have just a listing of present and former diversity residents. And I was looking at ACRL's page actually 2 days ago, and it looks like the present residents are not listed, or at least they moved that. But what I had to do, and I spent about 4 days doing this, I just got all the names that I could get, and I contacted these people personally. I found their staff pages or whatever, on, you know, their departmental listing or whatever, or if they were somebody that may have left the field, if I couldn't find them on a library website, then I went into Facebook or whatever I could, sent them messages through that, sent people messages through Twitter. I knew I had to just do it grassroots. I couldn't rely on just the listservs or just on the host institutions, even though the call for participation went on the listservs as well and was forwarded to the host institutions listed by ACRL as well. But I knew it was going to take personal correspondence in order for me to gain even close to a number of people that I could do some sort of statistical analysis on. And, you know, with saying that, all of a sudden that thought escaped me. I had some other point related to that, but just suffice it to say that had I not done that, I wouldn't have gotten the numbers, and I do feel that that personal reach out was what got even as many responses as I did get. Oh, that's where I was going with that. The reason I got so many emails from people was because I was emailing them. In case you were wondering, well, how'd you get all this email feedback? It was because I emailed them first. So then they were emailing me back and saying, hey, yada, yada, yada. So I don't know that I wouldn't have got, if I would have gotten personal feedback like that, had I not done that. All right. One thing that I wanted to do, so I'll have Mike come up. What I wanted to do was, since UNCG has been so helpful and since this is so relevant to things that UNCG does, and since I'm so grateful, I did want to donate a bound copy of my dissertation to the University of North Carolina at Greensboro's Jackson Library. So I will do that at this time. Please take a photo.
Very good.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
We're prepared to transition into a panel discussion on residencies, any other kind of practical aspects of employment as it relates to going through the educational process. If anyone has any questions, we have Wanda Brown from Winston-Salem State University, Lori Russell from High Point Public, and April Dawkins from here representing school media. Kind of cover the whole range. That includes online. So if anyone have any questions that they would like to ask related to anything like that? If not, we can go have snacks.
Can I say something? If there are any library school students here, you have a chance to talk to directors and a chance to a bridge. You might have to do that.
Or if there's any current staff looking for something new and different, we won't.
I wasn't going to go there.
Maybe they don't know why, maybe they don't know what they would ask. But you have to actually step up here, I think, and see somebody.
You guys want to do that?
Wanda was done.
And you guys online, this is Wanda Brown from Winston-Salem State.
Hello. I guess I'll just say that I think a lot of what Jason has touched on today goes back to the word that came to mind was intentional, right? And I think in libraries and in everything, we have to be intentional about our approaches, right? So those people, their hearts are in the right place. They want to host an internship. They want to diversify their staff. So sometimes their intentions are right, but then they don't always get it right, right? I thought when you were mentioning about the young lady who was pushing the young lady to public service, right? So probably in the back of her mind, she was thinking, I want my students of color to see a librarian that looks like them, so she's pushing them to the forefront, even though this person was begging, "Oh, put me in tech services." Right? So it was the intention was right, but the method and the way they did it was sometimes wrong. And so as far as career-wise, to those of you out there, I would say to use that same word, intentional. Right? It's like life can somehow or another just happen to you. It can happen to bounce to this position, happen to bounce to another one, or you can actually sit down and think about it and be intentional. Here's what I'm enjoying in library school. Here's what I think I'd like to do, but yet I want to be prepared, right? So I want to know enough about what goes on in libraries that wherever they need me, I'll be beneficial. But then once you find that, or once you identify that, then be intentional about where I am and where I want to go from here. So, okay.
Great, thank you. Laurie? That's Laurie Russell from High Point Public.
Following Wanda is always difficult. Let me just start by saying that. But to expound on that a little bit, as far as public libraries are concerned, I think the mentoring process that you talked about is a very large component of it. Take advantage of mentors. They can be instructors, they can be somebody in your state association, they can be somewhere you're working as a volunteer and you see someone in that institution, hey, I want to get where you are eventually. So take the intention Wanda talked about, but think about how can I get practical experience with that and how can I get practical advice from that to help move myself forward. And think about what you can give back to that institution. It's not all about what you get, but what you can do for them as well. So I think those two parts work well together.
Thank you. April, you want to add anything? April Dawkins from the newest faculty member here at the LIS department.
So my background's an interesting one because I spent 15 years as a high school librarian, and Jason and I were in the doctoral program together at the University of South Carolina, and I'm a graduate of North Carolina Central's MLS program. So 15 years as a high school librarian, and then I went back and got my PhD, and I'm now working here, working in the school library preparation program. And I will say one of the things that was important for me was mentoring. And as a school librarian, you're usually the only one in the building, so finding a mentor was always a challenge. And that took networking and those types of skills that we can build in the program, but also taking that challenge on for myself to find a mentor outside of my school building, in the district, and then as a PhD student, finding the right program and then the right mentor for me was key. The other thing that I did was I took an opportunity to expand my boundaries beyond school library media. I actually took a position at the Caroliniana Library at South Carolina, which is a special collections library. They do archives and manuscripts collection in South Carolina history. And so I did that for a year and a half while working on my PhD because I wanted to broaden my horizons. So any opportunity you have to sort of broaden your horizons and bring more skills into your skill set, I think that's a good opportunity to take. So if I could help you with anything in the future, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you all of you for sharing. Any other thoughts or anything to add or questions? Yes, ma'am. Come on up. Dr. Nora Bird from the Library Science program.
Hi, I just want to say, we call this building your own yellow brick road. And what that means is that, and I loved what Wanda said about intention.
but there are accidents along the way. You move to a different state and you really need to have a job, so you kind of go in a different direction. Make the most of those. They can feel like detours, but they can also enrich you to the point where, oh, I'm going in a different direction now, and be prepared to take a few risks. If you're building your own yellow brick road, it might go through the woods, and you might find the scary witch, and it might be something you didn't know you were going to do, but kind of reach back into your library education and any mentors that you've met along the way in terms of paraprofessional jobs, volunteering, all of those people. You didn't maybe know this, but they were pushing for you. Your faculty members are still there. Those people you volunteered for, even if you were just shelving books, they paid attention to the fact that you were a library student. The people that you worked for in different organizations, they're glad that you went to library school, and they want you to succeed in that direction. So keep in touch. One thing I always like to say to everybody in this field is that this is a really small field. You don't think about it. It seems like there's thousands of libraries, but it's really amazing how you come around and meet the same people again. So 30 years ago, I worked for Susan Nutter at MIT, and now she's the director of North Carolina State University Library. And so she still knows who I am, and we're not friendly, but I know I can ask her questions if I need to, and that's the kind of network that you're building for yourselves. Again, even with volunteer jobs, even with paraprofessional jobs, those people are paying attention, and you should be paying attention to them. So, okay.
Thanks, Nora. I'd like to add something. I got a job once because the interview question was, what did you learn from your previous supervisors? So I kind of rattled off all the different things I learned, and I kind of said, you learn something from everyone that you encounter. And I got the job because of that, they told me later. So I truly believe as you're moving through your program, moving through your jobs and whatever, look at every learning opportunity that you can find as you interact with other people, okay, good or bad, okay, there's learning opportunities everywhere. Anybody else want to say something? I knew he would.
I just have to be very honest with you. In 1998, when I interviewed for my position at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, everything we've talked about in this room was not something that was on my mind. That was not anything that I discussed during the interview. None of my visions. But definitely, I am glad that UNCG took time and said, hey, we want you to be a part of what we're doing here. And true, I'm very proud of what Jason has done. And true, I'm proud of my colleagues. And I'll just let you know, when we created the residency program, we were doing a lot of research, going to conferences, talking to other programs, and we heard from residents who didn't have a great experience. We also know programs like, I think, Purdue University that stopped having the residency program. But we still said, hey, we need to try it. And actually, it was set up to have 2 people, because we saw the cohort experience, but funding, we lost that funding. But definitely, it was exciting to have Jason here, and I do know that those years is when we started working on the ACE Scholars program. So having him with the experience he had from NC Central really added to that program. And I also remember a few hires between us and the library school that said, we saw what you were doing with diversity. We saw what Jason was doing. That's why we applied for the position. That's why we want to be a part of it. So true, I would say, and if anything, it's been an opportunity for me to give back to the profession. And I feel like years from now, there are going to be some people who said, I'm so glad UNC Greensboro and Jason did this research study, did this work. It'll be something to build on. That's what I want to say.
Okay, we have refreshment outside. Why don't we adjourn? I want to thank you once again, Dr. Alston, for coming and sharing with us. And thank you guys for participating. Let's eat cake or whatever's out there. I'm sorry? What's in his cake? I think I owe you an answer to a question. No, I was just saying, I think you asked me a question about recording the interviews next week. Ask David Glenn, he kind of shuffles that sometimes as where to put it, so people go back and listen to All we have to do is when we start, just say, you know, we would like to record this session for members who are here. Is that okay with you?